Hello, Chris. Delighted to be chatting with you. Myself and Steve Evans here.
Hi, Chris.
Hello there.
Yeah,
hi
good to catch up with you.
nice to be speaking with you guys too. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. And another one from Scotland, Terry.
Yeah.
We're doing quite well at the
Our
moment.
favourites. Yeah.
I can't remember his name now. The Scottish fella and his American lady friend. Remember?
Oh, Derek King and Julie.
Derek King.
Julie, the Queen of Horror.
Anyway, you're in the silver granite city of Aberdeen, I believe. Is that right? Yeah.
That's right. I'm in Aberdeen, northeast coast of Scotland. That's right.
And is it true that it's one of the best places in the UK for spotting whales, dolphins, and sharks? Or is this a myth?
No, it's not so much of a myth. I've never seen any sharks myself. I hear tiger sharks. I've never seen those myself, but we do get quite a few bottlenose dolphins, and we have had pods of orca in the past as well. Wow. The sightings of dolphins seem to be a lot more frequent these days, but as far as I understand, that there is one of those sort of like warmer water currents that goes up the North Sea, so you tend to get unusual exotic things will sweep up onto the beaches and stuff like that from God knows where. But a beautiful stretch of the country anyway. I mean, great cliff edges and great beaches there. It's I thoroughly recommend it to any of your viewers to visit us on holiday.
Yeah. I thought it'd be really cold up there and it wouldn't attract like some whales or sharks or anything, but apparently
it is cold. It's definitely cold, but
wouldn't suit me. It definitely wouldn't suit me.
Yeah. Chris, you're a member of the Writers Guild of Great Britain and BAFTA. How do you become a member of these organisations? And do you have any special benefits of becoming a member?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I became a member of Scottish BAFTA off the back of film productions that I was involved with. Yeah. You have to have done a few film productions in a professional capacity in order to apply and sort of be able to become a member of BAFTA Scotland. It's kind of the same with the Writers Guild. You become what's called a candidate member of the Writers Guild in Great Britain, which is what I am at the moment. You have to accrue a certain amount of credits in order to become a full-blown member, which is when you start paying proper dues to your union. But you know, the BAFTA Scotland of it all really came about from the film that I wrote the screenplay for, Stalker, and we were advised by the production company that it might be a good idea to apply to BAFTA Scotland because it's another sort of, I suppose, another level of legitimacy to your name, I guess, as much as it can be, and it also allows you. I mean, in terms of benefits, BAFTA Scotland's wonderful because you get to have a say in the vote, so you're voting in awards and things like that. And within your category, I'm within the screenwriters category, so I get to vote in certain elements of the awards there, and they do great workshops and Q&As that you can apply to be a part of, where you can have conversations with other professional screenwriters and producers and directors. Great for networking, but the biggest perk for me, being such a massive film fan, is that you get screeners. There are online screeners to a lot of the awards and movies, which is great.
Yeah, brilliant. I was going to say, it's a bit like a community then, isn't it? In its own little hub, if you like.
It is. It's nice. Yeah. I mean, in this country, in the UK, really, the filmmaking community is surprisingly small, it seems. Yeah. And networking becomes more a case of it. There is that old saying in the film industry that it's not what you know, it's who you know, and that really becomes true when you start working professionally within it. Because I'd say I've probably progressed more in my career through knowing other people and having conversations with them than simply through submitting a screenplay or by entering a chat room with a producer or something like that. It's an interesting thing to be a part of that community now, but it's nice. It is beneficial in a lot of ways. There's something about having that little shield, the BAFTA's mask on your profile. There's something about that for some reason makes people a couple of doors open that perhaps were not open before.
Yeah, I'm sure they do, yeah.
There's nothing in those rooms, but you can get in them. So.
It's a start.
It is. I believe in starts, absolutely.
Absolutely. So as well as being a screenwriter of your own work, you also act as a judge for competitions through your own consultancy, the Script Courier. So you're teaching the art of script writing as well.
Well, I've done a bit of that. I don't judge. I work for a couple of screenwriting competitions as a consultant and as a script reader. So essentially, They'll send me
Oh,
maybe
right. Yeah,
20 scripts a week, and I'll do a little 1-page of notes on it, and then I'll send those away to the writer. And often they'll do something similar to this, where we'll do a little Zoom one-on-one consultation, and I'll take them through it. And on my own consultation service, the Script Courier, I do roughly the same sort of service, but I suppose it's a more personalized approach because it's my own time, because it's my own freelance business. It allows the conversation to be less about, right, let's go through this point, this point, this point. You can allow the conversation to flow a bit more. And I find that it's quite beneficial for the writers to just be able to brainstorm as much as anything else. Because you can sit there and you can poke holes in what issues need to be addressed within anybody's work, but to be able to actually have a conversation and say, well, there's things you could do. And because a lot of people will say there are rules to screenwriting, and there aren't. There are conventions, and conventions can be moved and shifted and broken, but there aren't any concrete rules, not really. But there are certain set ways that people like to tell stories. So it's all about sort of guiding the writer through talking to the writer into whatever direction, into whatever place that will make them more comfortable to make the work better.
Okay, so I was going to ask next then, well, what makes a brilliant script stand out? But you've sort of answered that in a way. But how does it stand out in a bunch of standard scripts? Is there something that hits people and says, wow, that's good? Or
yeah, you know what it is for me, and of course what's interesting about working for script competitions and screenplay festivals is that you realize very quickly that it is all about the individual. Everything is very singular. Whenever I read a screenplay, I might think it's the best thing since sliced bread. 2 or 3 other readers might read the same screenplay and just get no connection to it. And I think what it is that makes a screenplay great for me is always about relatability. You can take me on whatever big fantastical journey you want to. It can be science fiction, horror, fantasy, thriller. Give me characters that I can relate to. Give me a character that I can say, I see myself in them in some way. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, but as long as you've got relatable characters, you can take a story anywhere. And I think that the best films do that. You look at, you know, a film like, say, Titanic, which is as big a movie as you can get, but it's about 2 people and it's about a romance, essentially. There's the relatability factor within this huge spectacle. Same with something like Star Wars. Star Wars is really about the characters. It's not about the bigger side of things. And so it's interesting to me that tends to be the stories I gravitate closer to. I tend to be more interested in stories that are not necessarily about massive spectacle. They are more about character driven. They are more about people and the sort of the people that I can relate to, the people that I've grown up with. And it's more about that. It's relatability is key.
Okay.
Well,
what I found, Chris, is that a good screenplay, it's as good a read as a good novel.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
for like the film that the poster behind you there, the Billy Wilder film, The Apartment, the script for that is a particularly good read. It
is, very much so. I mean, some writers can do that. There's a great writer, the Bruce Robinson, who wrote With Nell and I.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if you've ever
brilliant
read
film.
I don't know if you've ever read the screenplay for that.
I have.
But I mean,
yep.
It's almost like prose.
It's as it there on the screen as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a very particular type of thing to do, because oddly enough, a lot of screenplay consultants will tell you that's the wrong way to do it, but you can only write within your own signature voice and your own signature style. And if that is how you write, that is how you write. And I love whenever a screenplay allows me to really visualize the world of the story and the characters, and anytime that you can actually hear the character's voice that's sort of completely separate from the actor that might have played them in the movie, I think that's a really good sign of good writing as well. I mean, I tend to write stuff that is quite dialogue driven, and I am always trying to play in my head what the dialogue should sound like, and I never write anything down properly until I can make it sound right in my head, which is a strange process to go through, but it's a process that works for me. It doesn't work for everybody, because sometimes you'll read a screenplay and the dialogue is very matter of fact and very workmanlike and is just about getting you from point A to point B. They don't put enough of the personality of the character in there as well, because you want the character to stand out and be sort of specific and distinct.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your work, Chris. You currently have the feature-length film, The Mire, in post-production. Can you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, The Mire. Well, The Mire is a film that I wrote about 2 years ago for a director friend of mine called Adam Nelson. He and I had been sort of working together on another project, which actually became the other feature film that I made, Stalker. And at one point, very, very early in the early stages of the first draft of that script, he had shown an interest in directing that. And then while he was away trying to figure out how he could do it, a production company comes along and offers me a sum of money and says, we want to option this and we want to make it. So I had to balance up, I've got a daughter, I've got to eat, I've got bills to pay. I was like, well, I'm going to have to take the money on this one. So I went to Adam and said, look, I don't want you to feel left out of this. So give me a subject matter and I will write you a screenplay and we'll do it. We'll still make a film together. So he went off and he gave me this list of subjects. Yeah. And the one subject that we both sort of sparked to was the idea of a cult. So the Mire is about a man named Joseph Layton, who is running essentially this large sort of religious community within this small town that he calls the Canon. And he's been running this community for about 16 years or so. And he has essentially been conning his followers for 16 years into essentially giving over all of their sort of earthly possessions and wealth over a certain amount of time to his community and to his cause, to this cult. And when the film takes place over the course of one night, and it's the night before the eve of ascension, as he calls it, which is supposed to be a planned mass suicide of all the followers, which he has no intention of going through with. He's going to take the money and run. But on the night that he's going to escape, he gets sort of locked into his own church by his two most devout followers who have believed every single word he has said. So now he finds himself caught in this kind of horrible catch-22 situation where he has to get out of there before 7 o'clock that next morning when they are supposed to all do this mass suicide. But he can't tell them the truth because they believe every single word he's said. And he has to try and string a lie within a lie to get out of there. And so the movie takes place over the course of 8 or 9 hours of this kind of battle of wits between these three characters.
Yeah. Sounds brilliant.
When's
that going to be? It's in post-production now. When's that going to be released?
Yeah, well, we actually had a premiere for it. It's finished now. And we had a premiere for it down in Portsmouth where it was shot in February. At the moment, it's on a festival run. So essentially, it doesn't have distribution yet. We're hoping during its festival run, it'll pick up a little bit of interest. Then it'll be on to distribution and hopefully it'll be released at some point this year. We're hoping anyway. We're optimistic towards it because we've been working on it now for around 3 years. So it's about time to let the people see it, I think.
Okay.
How did you get the go-ahead or the green light then to turn your scripts into a production in the first place? Who decides that and says, go?
Well, I mean, interestingly, this has all come about for me really in the last 3 years. 3 years ago, I was still working as a night manager in hotels. I was, I graduated from film school in 2001. So it's been a 20-year journey to get to this point, essentially, for me doing a lot of, I've worked as a bookstore manager, I've worked as a waiter, a barman, but I've never given up. I was always writing and I was always working on something. And I'd put in a screenplay of mine called Follow Up to a competition in the British Independent Film Festival. And it didn't win, but it did place as a finalist. But one of the judges in that festival had read the script and he was an independent film producer. And he got in touch with me 2 days after this festival, says, look, I really loved that script and I'd like to option it for my company. So I said, I'm 40 years old at this point and I've never had a screenplay option. So I was like, yep, sure, no problem. I don't even care how much money you're offering. So he options that. And then off the back of that, he says, what else have you got? Because we were in the middle of the pandemic at this point, the first lockdown. So all producers could really do was read material. So he says, what else have you got? And I said, well, I've got this little horror movie script I've been working on, which is the film that then became Stalker. So he picked that script up, read it and said, well, I could get this film made this year if COVID calms down. And so we optioned that one as well. And it was really just a set of circumstances. My career kind of snowballed off the back of that. And from the second you become an optioned screenwriter, essentially you have finally found a level of sort of like professionalism within the industry. So immediately other people start leaning in towards your work and saying, well, if he's been optioned twice on this, then maybe there's something here. And you have other producers and other directors start sending you emails or messages or phone calls. And it just kind of has all evolved from there. And now I find myself in a position 3 years after being a night manager in a hotel to getting commissioned to write a feature script for a production company in Ireland, or getting commissioned to write a pilot script for a potential TV series. All this sort of stuff's happening. And it's happened fairly quickly, which I know doesn't usually happen in the industry. It's very rarely a screenwriter will have 2 feature films back to back the way we have. In fact, the Mire finished shooting, and the next day, the other company started shooting Stalker, which is almost unheard of. It was a very strange month for me, that one.
Wow.
Sounds great. Brilliant. Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. I mean, we hear this, it's quite a common story we hear with people like you who end up doing that many different jobs over a period of time before then they suddenly make it, and you think, you used to do that and this, and yet start somewhere. You've got to earn money, haven't you? So
that's right. I mean, it's all about, it feels like that old cliche. Everybody always, when I have other screenwriters who are, or budding screenwriters that come to me and they say, well, how did you make it? And I almost don't have the heart to tell them. It was like 2 decades of nothing before I get to this point. But without those 20 years, the work isn't as good, I don't think. I am 10 times the writer now than I was 15 years ago. And you need that life experience. You know, in those 20 years, I became a parent, I was married, I was divorced, I've had this happen, that happen, and a whole bunch of sort of, and COVID as well. You throw that into the mix. It's been an unusual 20 years, to say the least, but it seems, touch wood, like it's all been worth it. And it's kind of, I now get to wake up every morning and do this for a living, which is really quite exciting, but it's still hard to get over the thrill of that.
That's brilliant. So I did a master's in screenwriting at the same time, back in, I think it started in 1999, finished in 2001 at John Moores University. And we had like said, Jimmy McGovern coming in teaching classes. And he always said to us, you're going to write a film script at the end of this course. I want you to have 2. He said, because if you get the chance to meet someone in finance who's got a producer, you always say, they'll always ask, have you got any, what else have you got in your drawer? You always have 2 screenplays there ready. Oh, I've got this, by the way, to present. Yeah. Like a calling card, if nothing else.
That's right. And I mean, and that is vital. I mean, Jimmy McGovern, you want to talk about great writers. I mean, he's one of my idols in terms of writing. I mean, from Cracker, Brookside, all the stuff that Hillsborough, I mean, an incredible writer. I went to a lecture that he gave actually in Liverpool. This was probably back in this must have been around the middle of the noughties, something like that. Yeah. And he said something really fascinating in that lecture where he talked about, it's really important when you're writing a story to consider the poverty of your characters, because the poverty of a character, how much money a person has, will often dictate how far they're willing to go, and how far a character will go often will dictate where you can take a story. So, you know, somebody who's got a lot of money is probably less likely to try robbing a corner shop to fit, whereas somebody who's got nothing, the chances, the possibilities and what you can do with that character are fairly endless, and it opens up a huge amount of dramatic possibilities. And I've never forgot him saying that, because obviously you look at his body of work and he's very interested in the working class. He's interested in the place he came from, and he's very sympathetic and empathetic to them, as you have to be, particularly in this country and particularly now. But I grew up with that sort of writing, and I grew up with seeing that sort of person represented on television in particular. Really important. I mean, I think of other great, in particular in Liverpool, we had Carla Lane writing things like Bread, which I watched when I was a kid, and I absolutely loved it, because it was essentially a sort of Catholic family, and I come from an Irish Catholic family, so we kind of understood that idea of you all came round at Sunday lunch and you all sat down and there was the prayers, and then you could eat and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, there are other great writers. Colin Welland was from Liverpool, who again, obviously he did all the Play for Today and all those sort of things. But to get back to the point that you made, it is vital to make sure you have as much work as possible. I'm constantly writing, even if nothing's getting produced, because I want to have as much there. I didn't know what kind of business Stalker was going to do. You know, it's out on DVD now, and it got a theatrical release in the States, a very minor theatrical release, but it's out in the States. You can get it on digital. I don't know what business the Mire is going to do, because you just never know how a film is going to land. But I do know that if some producer comes knocking, and they say, what else have you got? I want to have 3 or 4 other things to be able to show them. So I've got a horror movie, I've got a thriller, I've got a TV pilots, I've got all this stuff sitting, waiting. And it's just a case of waiting for the knock, really, and hoping the opportunity comes. I've been very lucky. I know I've been incredibly lucky. So a lot of people say, don't do yourself a disservice. There is talent there. And yeah, talent plays a part, but luck has had a huge amount to do with where I find myself in the space of really only like 36 months, really.
I know you met him, Terry, but I met him when he came over to South Wirral a couple of years back. Yeah. And you know what? What a lovely fella he is.
He's generous with his time. Yeah.
You know what? And he made a point of coming from the other end of the room when I walked in. I was slightly late, had been delayed. And he came in and introduced himself and said, "Oh, there's a seat for you here." And he didn't have to do that. There's other people there. And he made me feel at ease straight away. And I was in awe of him in a way. It was incredible. What a lovely guy.
It's the working class writers in particular that they're, you know, it sounds almost kind of pretentious to say this. They're of the people. They're not pretentious. Yeah. They're not up themselves or anything like that. Frank Cottrell Boyce is another Republican writer. He's very generous with his time as well. I kind of know him through a friend of a friend because I'm part of this kind of screenwriting network. He's a fascinating writer, and the subject matters that he tends to explore. He veers between very adult subject matter and then stuff for kids, which I think is wonderful. Yeah. And it's all about him growing up. And Terence Davies is a filmmaker. You know, he focuses on Liverpool and his childhood in Liverpool. There's some wonderful stuff that has come out of there. And I've always found the North in particular. I mean, obviously I come from the north of Scotland, but just the North in general, Northern people are just far more sort of like agreeable and generous with their time, and there's a kind of there's a perfect balance up here. It seems we're a lot calmer sometimes. If it's match day, maybe we're not as calm.
You know, one of the screenwriters we talked to, he said that a lot of the great screenwriters, they've had a troubled background. It gives them that sort of inner emotional feeling for hardship. And he said it once. He said he was talking to a lecturer at a California School of Screenwriting. And he said one of the points he made for the students coming on the course that they had to have a troubled background. He said he wasn't interested in teaching anyone from a happy family. I don't know if that's true or not, but
I mean, I think every voice is valid. That's something that I think there are a lot of great writers out there that don't know they're great writers, and because I think a lot of people are not encouraged, and therefore they don't think their voice matters in a lot of ways. I wonder sometimes, it's one of these thoughts that keeps me up at night, is how many great writers never put pen to paper in their lives, and how many great books or how many great stories did we maybe lose by them not doing that. And a lot of that comes down to circumstance. A lot of that can come down to you don't have time to write, you have to work, or you have to support people, you have to do this, that, whatever. Finding time for your voice and being creative, I think, is important. I think having trauma in your background never hurts, because I can't say I had the most traumatic upbringing or anything like that, but there was always drama in it. My parents got divorced. My father buggered off whenever I was quite young, and we never heard from him again. And you know, the absence of a father is probably something that is in the back of my head playing whenever I'm doing this sort of stuff. But I tend to approach anything I write as therapy anyway. And I wonder sometimes, and I'm worried, if I didn't have writing, I'd have to have some other creative output, because otherwise I would just sit with all this in my brain all the time. It's great to have somewhere to pour out all these things and try and figure them out on paper, and allow a fictional character to be your sort of conduit to figure that out. I think it's cheaper than therapy. I don't know how effective it is, but it's worked for me. I feel a lot more balanced in my 40s than I certainly did in my 20s. So
you've got an emotional well that you can draw upon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'll
be crying after this. It's fine.
As well as the screenwriting, you're a novelist too, and a published poet with Peer Pressure, coming of age novel, and onlines. I think it is onlines. Yeah, poetry collection. So what genre are you most comfortable with? What genre is best for you, do you find? Is it the action of the screenplay or something else?
I think the screenplay is where I feel most at home. That's what I first started writing seriously when I was a teenager, with screenplays. I always wrote short stories, and I always... That's
coming out at me. That's coming out at me anyway. Yeah, but go on, carry on. Yeah.
And you know, the novel was actually an experiment for me. At that point, I was working in a secondhand bookstore as a manager, and I was approaching 30, And I said to myself, I want to see if I can write a novel before I'm 30. So I started writing something. Oddly enough, the book was based on the first 5 pages of a screenplay I started writing. And as I was writing the script, and it's about a mother and a daughter, I started thinking that these women's voices are really interesting and they're really speaking. It feels like this needs more than just your 90-page screenplay. So I thought maybe this is the one that I try to write a novel of. And I'm a big Nick Hornby fan. So I wanted to write something kind of in that Nick Hornby style. And you can tell Nick Hornby is also a screenwriter, which he is. He's been Academy Award nominated. He's a great screenwriter. But you can tell when you read his books because they're so chatty and they're very much, they're high concept pieces, a lot of his work. So I wanted to try that. And it took about 1.5 years working full-time in a bookstore and then grabbing 3 or 4 hours at night once my girlfriend had gone to sleep to just sit down and write maybe a chapter a night if I could. And the book turned out to be what it was. You can tell when you read it, I think. I haven't read it in a long time, but you can tell when you've read it that this is written by somebody who's 28, 29 years old. I'm sure it is rife with inaccuracies and grammatical errors and all that sort of stuff. It was actually a self-published piece. I had sent it out to a few publishing houses, but nobody was really particularly interested. I got a few people said nice things about it, which was nice. They didn't have to. But eventually it just got to the point where I was like, I'm going to have to self-publish this. So I did it, and it worked out fine because it was received okay. The poetry side of things is another matter. I did the poetry book a few years ago off of the back of, I used to do this thing on Twitter because I'm quite active on Twitter, where I would shout out at the end of each night, give me a word and I'll write you a poem based on the word, or give me a subject and I'll write you a poem based on that. And my followers would send me the weirdest stuff you've ever seen in your life and some of the most horrific words to write poems about. And then I would write them a poem off that. And then a friend of mine, who's also a writer, and he's an artist as well, a great guy called Chris White, he said to me, you should put this all into a compilation and just do a little self-published book of poetry. And I was like, I don't know if they're good enough for that, but that's what we did.
Excellent. Sorry, Terry, just talking on Twitter, you mentioned Twitter there. You've got, I think, 6,500 followers. Is that your main site you use? I expected you maybe, without being disrespectful, I thought maybe you'd have 60,000 followers. I don't know.
No, I've never been a number chaser when it comes to Twitter. Right. I think a lot of people with those higher numbers, they follow everyone they can, and then when they get the follows back, they unfollow those people, so they end up having this weird. I've always been more interested in it as a community. The 6,500 followers I have, I don't speak to every single one of them, but there are a good. There's a good 150 people there that I've known now for about 5 or 6 years. And it's made up of artists and writers and photographers and musicians. And I love having that sort of creative hub. So I use that. And I also like to think of myself as quite approachable. When I do my own screenwriting consultations, I think back to myself when I was 15 or 16 trying to write screenplays for the first time. And I would have killed for having somebody who was accessible, who was working in the industry. And, I'm not Aaron Sorkin, I'm not Quentin Tarantino, but, I do this for a living. So I would have killed to be able to speak to somebody that does it for a living and sort of get a clue and an idea as to what I need to do to get to that stage. Because, fame or success is only based on what's going on in your own head. As far as I'm concerned, I'm as successful as I need to be at this point. Everybody wants a bit more money. Of course, I'm not going to say that I would turn down a large check from Marvel or whatever, but I get to wake up every morning and sit at a computer and sit back and think, right, how many pages do I want to write today? As far as I'm concerned, that's a success for me. So I'm more than happy with that. And, I have a website, but I don't maintain it. So Twitter really is the place if anybody wants to get in contact with me to find me.
It's quality numbers rather than quantity, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. That's for me.
Makes perfect sense because I've seen other people with 200,000 followers and they don't do anything particular, and they're not particularly
nothing, famous. No interaction.
What have they done? Nothing, but follow people after people.
That's right.
I was going to ask you about the whether you've gone through a traditional publisher, but you've answered the question. You published independently.
Yeah.
Did you go through that the pain and the heartache and the extremely long and sometimes impossible wait for a reply from a publisher?
Oh yeah.
Looks like
rejections, the rejection letters as well, which I've kept. I've kept them all. What I do with my rejection
wallpaper the room, the whole side of that room.
Good, absolutely. I tend to keep the rejection letters, and I keep a note of the names. And then if I need somebody to die in a script, that's the name. That's the name of the character. So it's the same with critics.
Well, they say about rejection letters, don't they? If you can take any of the salient points out of that and not do it again next time, that's key. Because obviously the other stuff you're doing is right. So look at the faults that they pick up, maybe stay away from them. So it's good to keep them in a way,
It is. And I find that the more rejection letters you get on one piece, the more you can figure out if the same point is getting made by each of those rejections. Then you know that something really needs to be worked on. You're like, right, 5 people have pointed that out, so that needs to go, or that needs to be changed. So you have to find something. You have to find the optimism in the midst of any cynicism. I try to be as upbeat and positive online and with I try to celebrate the failures as much as the successes, because I don't think there's any harm in showing people, like, look, somebody might have rejected your piece, but that's one person. There are a lot of people out there. Don't worry so much. Nothing bad's going to happen to you. Just keep going. You have to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, for me then, what advice would you give to an aspiring writer, if it be a novel or a film script? Where does he start or she start?
Yeah, I mean, it's telling a story. It sounds like a cliche and it sounds a little bit pretentious or overly sentimental. Start telling stories from the heart. You don't have to start off with something huge or something grand. Write a story about something that you've been through, or write a story about the people about you look at someone like Stephen King. Stephen King might write very elaborate horror stories, but at heart, the majority of his best work is about his childhood and is about the people he knew and is about the things he went through. Carrie is about bullying. The Shining is about alcoholism. You have to funnel the things you're interested in into a story that has the right characters for that story as well. So it's important to have the idea, to find the right plot for that idea, and to just say to yourself, what characters would I like to see this through the eyes of? I think it's important to have perspective within your stories and relatability.
Brilliant, Chris. Thanks. Yeah,
great answer, Chris. It looks like time's caught up with us, but I've really absolutely enjoyed chatting with you. I could happily chat with you for a couple of hours.
Oh, yeah, this has been great, guys. I've really enjoyed this. It's lovely to have a conversation rather than just a Q&A. I've done a lot of Q&As over the last few years, so it's lovely to just chit chat, and you can go off on tangents and things like that. So it's lovely. So this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent. Which is exactly what we want. We often get people saying it's been like having a chat down the pub, which is what we want, really.
Exactly.
We want it relaxed, easy going.
Well, next time I'm in Liverpool.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's keep in touch. But for now, Chris, thanks very much.
Thank you, mate. Thank you very much, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot.